Hello folks, it is time for some more 40k rantage. First and foremost though, if you're looking for some cool models, make sure you head over to minimaker.com to check out their vast repertoire of 3D printed models. They are absolutely awesome. And I have to say, they do a lot to support the channel, and one army that will be making its way to Exile Fest this year will be the Space Wolves, brought in by Minimaker for you to have a little oogle at whilst you're there. They're amazing, really good quality models, fantastic prices, and they ship anywhere in the world for €10. That's right, even our brothers from Australia and New Zealand can partake in that deal. Alright, so minimaker.com, use the promo code Northern Exile down below to get yourself 10% off your order at checkout. Lovely jubbly. So today is more of a, shall we say, chill time, where we're going to be discussing how things are going in the hobby in general in terms of release schedules, and of course our main factor of the day, which is 40k is in danger of not being a creative space anymore, right? So I think the other day on Grimdark Therapy, go check out that podcast if you haven't. It's awesome, and I really enjoy doing it with Outer Circle and What the 40k. We were talking about modular kits that you get from Games Workshop. You know what I mean? You get your sprue out and you can do your Marines in one of two standard ways. I've actually been doing this with my own. I've tried my best. I can actually show you a really good portion here. Here you go. Some Exiled Blades are on the screen right now. I have tried my best to convert a few of this 5-man squad into having different poses. Just using what you get in the Primara Space Marine sprue box, right? This is all you get, and I've used one arm of a Grey Knight. That'll be the right arm of the guys with the halberds. There's one arm of a Grey Knight instead of a Primara Space Marine. So, I had to dive into multiple kits to do this, but gone are the days where just out of your normal Space Marine box, you could get some really cool posed models just out of standard. Gone are those days. Nowadays you have to go into multiple little boxes to make sure that you have models that look a little bit different, and even then you are fighting an uphill battle to make them look different. As you can see, the guys with the halberds are essentially in two different poses but with exactly the same parts. You know, these are little wangle things you have to do to try and make sure that your models look like they're something different than the norm. And that, in my opinion, is really shoddy, because this is a normal troop choice, alright? So I expect this to have not that many options in terms of conversion parts. I get that, that's fine. But in terms of your bespoke units, your Terminators, your Blade Guard veterans, they too are very one-size-fits-all kits. You get them out, you get the sprue, and you build your models exactly as they are on the front of the box. And that's pretty much all you can do, unless you go out of your way to buy several boxes of different models to use different parts on all of your models. I think Games Workshop missed a massive opportunity here to sort of reset how they do these sprues. I completely understand that your bog standard intercessor units, and this is one of them by the way, your bog standard intercessor unit can't really, let's be honest, be having loads of different parts that you can convert your models with, because they're normal troop choices, and that would be really expensive to do, even for Games Workshop, because these are the models that everybody needs and everybody buys to fill out their armies, right? What I can say is that when you get a bespoke Blade Guard unit, or let's say Inner Circle Companions from the Dark Angels, those are model sets that you need to be able to express yourself with. You need to be able to give them different poses, different heads, different arms, different shoulder pads, right? Different robes, different weapons. You need these options in there because these are the more expensive kits from which you get very few models anyway. That's where I think the expression has to come in. We're seeing Games Workshop gradually make 40k a place where player expression is really difficult. One other part of the side I wanted to talk about on this is their release schedule, and Maka said something of this effect the other day in his video, and he gave me something that is just absolutely, it astounds me really, and these are graphs showing what models have come out and when. He made these, by the way, so go and check out Outer Circle's channel down below. He actually made these and they're awesome. So we can see here where Games Workshop's priorities actually are when it comes to giving out models or releasing models, right? So, over the past few editions, these are the Space Marine models not counting Ultramarines. By Ultramarines, I mean the boxes that you get, your bog standard Marines in. You know, when you walk into Games Workshop and you can see, the blue Marines are on the shelf, right? You can paint those any which way you want, okay? Your Assault Intercessors, your Normal Intercessors, your Aggressors, things like that, none of them are included in this graph. If they were, this graph would jump by a couple of maybe like 50 to 60 units more. But over the past couple of editions, these are the Space Marine units that have come out in general, okay? You can see there is a lot there, yeah? Can you imagine if we did Xenos on this graph, where we would be, right? We would be around, 50 to 60 new models across the board. We're talking Necrons, we're talking Tyranids, Eldar, right? All of them, 50 to 60 units. Space Marines without Ultramarines, without your bog standard Marines, 116 units since 5th edition, okay? Let's move on to our next part of the graph. That's a lot of models, as you can see. But a lot of these models too, the ones from 5th edition, these are incredibly posable. You have the Grey Knight Strike Squad in there, right? The Grey Knight Strike Squad that is incredibly convertible to almost a ridiculous degree. If you buy 2 of those squads, you can have literally any pose that you like on most of your models, swapping the weapons around, swapping the running poses or the helmets or the equipment. You can have bespoke models in your army ready to go. And a lot of these units from 5th edition are exactly the same in doing things like that. Even your bog standard, your Blood Angels Terminators there, your Wolf Guard Terminators, these are all units that you can mix and match things to make them look incredibly different and yours. They look unique. You're expressing yourself. As we move on into 6th and 7th, that starts to get stripped away a little bit, right? You start to bring in the Dark Vengeance box set had a lot to do with this. Dark Vengeance was a modular set, unlike most others that came out. A very modular set. I look at this as the Watch Captain curse, right? I came into work in the Games Workshop in this 6th and 7th edition bubble over here, and that Watch Captain you can see on the right hand side of the 6th and 7th one, I think he's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th down. That is the curse of what is about to happen, okay, with our models. We take away their expression, we take away their poses, we take away their weapon slots, and what we have is a model that you get out of the box that you build and paint exactly as the box says. If you don't, it looks odd. That started to happen towards the end of 7th edition for me. I started to notice that most of these box sets could be built in all of one way. Okay? Another one was the Deathwing Knights. The Deathwing Knights that came out around then too were incredibly restrictive. That you would think, okay, Deathwing Knights, yeah, they're the main dudes of the Dark Angels. You should be able to build them in any which way you want. No, you got 2 weapon types to choose from, and that's it. Right? There's no different poses, no different helmets, there's no options to make an apothecary out of there. The really cool value for money models from 5th edition, I'm talking your Grey Knight Terminators, right? The value there is because you can build characters from those Terminator sets if you wanted to. I knew people, and I did this too, where I would buy a Grey Knight Terminator set to fill out my character units. Each of those Grey Knight Terminators will be built into a character. I'd have an apothecary, a librarian, an ancient, right? You could do that with that set. Similar, I thought you could do that with a Deathwing Knight set for your Deathwing, right? You could get your champion, you could get your Grandmaster, you could get all from this Deathwing Knight set. But the way that Games Workshop released the sprue was that was impossible, because every single Deathwing Knight, every single Deathwing Knight was essentially the same, right? There was no expression. That was stripped back and stripped away. You could no longer build characters from that Deathwing Knight set. That was the start for main 7th edition of the uneasy feeling of Games Workshop stripping back your expression. Then we move into 8th edition, the edition that I sold mostly working for Games Workshop and when I was working for my own hobby store, my own local hobby store here in the Northwest, right? This is the box set I sold most. The Dark Imperium box set on all of its myriad shapes and sizes. And it was extremely one note. You got what you got in the box, and you built what you had in the box, And that is what you had. Now, Games Workshop traded off your choice, right? They traded all that off for beautiful looking sculpts. And I will say this. The Primaris Space Marines, I know a lot of people out there aren't fans of the Primaris. I am. I love Primaris Space Marines. I think they look spectacular. I really do. And I really enjoy painting them and building them. And I think they're one of the best things to happen to the model range in a long time. The lore, I can take or leave. I would much rather the Primaris Space Marines were simply an armor upgrade and a scale upgrade for the Space Marines across the board. And rather than them being this actual thing, that crossing the Rubicon and all that. I think that's a load of nonsense. But the actual models themselves, I think, look imperious and I love them. But Games Workshop have traded off that quality for choice, for expression. And that's something that I've seen going forward. And in 9th and 10th, that has only seemingly gotten worse over time, right? Just simple fact of the matter. You can see it on this graph, which is why I wanted to use it. Right here, right in front of you. It's gotten worse over time. These are tournament playing pieces. The models on the left, okay, the models on the left are models that wargamers use to express themselves and have fun with. And also, they can play a game with them too. The models on the right are tournament game pieces. Bespoke, right? One meaning. You know what you're looking at, even the silhouette, you know what that model's probably going to do on the tabletop, right? And in that, it has its own strengths, I agree, right? It has its own strengths, its own things, right? But the more you lean to the left-hand side of this graph, the more the game becomes tournament-based, the more the game becomes crunch-based, and the more left you go on this graph, the more the game becomes expression-based. We can also see, on the left-hand side of that graph, do you notice anything about this? I'll give you a couple of seconds while I sip my coffee. Do you notice the wolves and different creatures? And tanks? And dreadnoughts? Right? The more left you go on this graph, the more expression you have in your army choice, because all of these were actually pretty good in the game, and you could use them to really create something special for your army. I had guys that I knew who had a Space Wolf conversion army where they weren't even Space Wolves, they were just, actual Vikings in space, and they used mostly wolves. You know, they had pack leaders, so they would have 4 or 5 Space Marine characters, 4 or 5 Space Marine squads, and then a load of wolves, Fenrisian wolves, and they'd send them at the enemy, and it was awesome, it was thematic, and it would work sometimes, right, in 5th and 6th edition, it would work, you know, you could have an army like that, and it's pretty mean. Try doing that in 10th edition, and see your arse get blown out of your head at the nearest opportunity, right? You start to see as you move right into the right way on this graph, towards the right-hand side, the stripping away of those cool little units that you could throw into your army to create difference, to create expression. Now we have Marines of different standard sizes, and you know full well, when they bring back Jakatai Khan, because they're bringing back all the fucking Primarchs, when they bring back Jakatai Khan, do you know what he's going to be? He won't be on a bike, he'll be on foot. Just like every other Marine on the tabletop, because they can't have anything different, because that would mess with the balance of their precious tournaments, and we can't have that, right? This is what I mean by 40k is in danger of not being a creative space anymore. They're slowly stripping away what made it great. The expression of the player on the tabletop. Your army was yours and yours alone, and you could make it be absolutely positively unique. Beyond the colours. Nowadays, people will say, yeah, we can pick your army different colours, you can do whatever you want. Yeah, dude, that's always been a thing. And beyond different colours, you could make your... Let's take Space Wolves as an example, right? Is there one of Space Wolves here? I think there is. Yeah, here we go. Just Space Wolves as an example, okay? Look at the army on the left in 5th edition. Yeah? And look at the army on the right. You can see the difference in expression there. You have Fenrisian wolves, you have Thunderwolf cavalry, you have Wolfen, you have dudes who are like Richie riding giant wolves as characters. You have several different characters there that can be composed and posed in several different ways. You have your normal Longfangs, you have your, your Grey Hunters and all these other things that are there ready to be go. And each of these units, by the way, are quite posable, and they're also quite swappable. So you can actually create your own specific Space Wolf units. And by the way, I came up against this army in 5th all the time because my 2 best friends played Space Wolves, okay? So you could absolutely create units in the rules in Space Wolves back in the day that would just have a random power claw in there, or a random set of power swords, or a random las cannon in one of your units, just to give it that bit more of an expression, to lean your army in a specific way, because you're trying to absolutely express yourself in the choice of models that you take to the tabletop, right? Move towards the right hand side, and we have different sizes and different colours of Space Marines. That's it. Where is your expression? And by the way, people will also say, well, you can go and use the old Thunderwolf Cavalry. Number one, I fully admit that the old Thunderwolf Cavalry looks silly compared to the new Primaris Space Marine models. Absolutely. So mixing and match will look really weird on the tabletop, which is why Games Workshop have done it that way, because they don't want you to mix and match, right? And number two, they're not very good in the game. So the newer models that Games Workshop bring out tend to be much better in combative, in tournament play, in matched play, right? So why would you? Your army in 10th edition doesn't really include the models from 5th edition. They may have rules, but they're not very good rules. 10th edition, the models you see there on the 10th edition on the right hand side, on the models Games Workshop want you to use for Space Wolves, which is several different flavours of the same infantry pose, essentially. Okay? Now, as I said before, they are gorgeous models. I will say that. But on the same flip side, you know? And I will be using these pictures a bit later on, not in this video, but on Thursday's video, to show just where things are going in terms of the model release schedule. I think Outer Circle did a video on that the other day. But I have a few things that I wanted to expand off of. It is a good video, and I will link it on that video on Thursday when I do mine, as a little response to his. But you can see what I mean here. The player expression is slowly ebbing away. By the way, 9th edition, you got Ragnar Blackmane and nothing else. That's hilarious. I can laugh as a Grey Knight player. I'm allowed to do that because, yeah, as a preview, this is what we've got over the past couple of years. Fuck us, right? Yeah, cheers. Go fuck yourself, Games Workshop. Anyway, we're slowly seeing a stripping away of player expression in the models. Now, let's run back towards the lore. Okay, because we've covered it on a model-by-model basis. You know, on what kind of expression you have as a wargamer and how that's being stripped away slowly by Games Workshop. You could say this across the board, by the way. A lot of factions have gone through this. Tyranids have gone through this. Necrons have gone through this. The homogenization of your model sets to be this or that. A or B. You can have loadout A or loadout B because we can absolutely balance, quote-unquote, the matched play rules around having less options. The more options you give players, the harder your game is to balance. That's literally just how it is in most games, right? We all know that. So moving towards the lore. This is where I live. This is my wheelhouse. I can take my Auspex Tactics hat off now. Boom, that's over there. And I can switch on my Northern Exile lore Anorak opinions. So the lore of 40k, as we've seen it, has become more and more uniform over the years. 40k used to be this massive plethora of different things that you could write about, that you could really sink your teeth into as a setting as a whole. But there would also be limitations on what you could or couldn't do in the setting. People would often, as a misnomer, say, well, 40k is a soup setting, you can do what you want. That wasn't true, right? You definitely had a sandbox, but you had a sandbox with limitations in there. You couldn't just create like an Eldar who was, you know, going around fighting with the Space Marines because, you know, he could become a Space Marine, right? 40k kind of went away from that. At the very start of 40k, it was more soup-like. You know, you had your Inquisitors called Obi-Wan Kenobi, Robinson Crusoe, whatever his name was. You know, you had Eldar half Eldar who actually became Space Marines back in the day. I know, I shit you not, that happened. Right? Eldar and humans could have babies, and, you know, one of them was a really powerful Space Marine. I swear to God, was Marnius Calgar not once a half Eldar? Am I tripping there? Am I just, like, absolutely losing my mind? I swear Marnius Calgar was once half Eldar. Let me know in the comment section. I may have gotten that wrong, but I swear to God that somebody big in the Ultramarines used to be half Eldar. But anyway, this is how much of a soup 40k as a setting used to be. But in my opinion, that's worse. Okay? 40k eventually became more settled, it became more succinct and deep, and it started to have its own internal rules. They started to have a real vision, right? This is the same reason. I'm gonna equate 40k to gaming, as I often do. Do you ever realize when you watch a game in the Unreal 5 engine that looks like photorealistic, that there's like an uncanny valley thing to it? It's like, it looks, it doesn't. Why does this looks more realistic? Like Oblivion, the Oblivion remake or remaster looks more realistic than Witcher 3, right? The Witcher 3. Hear me out. Yeah, but it looks worse. Why? Because the Oblivion remaster wants to look realistic above all things, right? Wants to look photo-real at points above all things. Same with Assassin's Creed, right? Wants to look photo-real, wants to look really good and realistic. Whereas The Witcher 3 has an art style, it has a vision. And to me, it looks better for that. Because you're playing with certain limitations, you're playing to actually give your vision over to the player. And in doing that, it's far more, shall we say, immersive, right? That I word that we all like to use. 40k is exactly the same. Okay, the original 40k was more of a, you could do whatever the hell you wanted, whenever the hell you wanted to do it. Whereas when we had certain limitations with 3rd, 4th, 5th edition, guys like Jess Goodwin, guys like Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, and Guy Thorpe, they started to really get drilling down into the lore. And in doing that, you had an art style. They looked at John Blanche's art and said, yes, this is what we're going to do. This is the thing. This is 40k. As soon as they did that, 40k had its own art style, it had its own vision, it had its own voice, and a lot of people started to really, absolutely think, yeah, this is our jam. The grimdark, the in-depth, the hopelessness, the rage against the dying of the light, power-armored space marines slicing through grimdark horrors, guardsmen being churned up by orcs and things. Dude, it was fucking awesome, right? Because 40k had an art style, it had a voice, and it wasn't homogenous. There were lots of different factions doing lots of different things. And the lore itself had limitations. No Primarchs, right? We're always going towards the end of the Imperium. We're fighting against the dying of the light. We're raging against it, saying, no, for the Imperium, for the Emperor, right? Or you could be on the Xenos or Chaos side, trying to bring it all down. Fighting for your brothers and no one else. Awesome stuff. Lots of potential there for writing. But then, 8th edition happened. And what did 8th edition bring? Well, in my opinion, 8th edition brought, what the Oblivion remaster brings to Oblivion. It washes out all of the expression and replaces it with tactical, replaces it with more realistic, quote-unquote, battles, replaces it with, a bit of hope coming in here and there, Primarchs coming back because we want to sell big models and things. We keep bringing in conflicts that, the good guys unequivocally win every single time. The Plague Wars, for instance, right? There was no real cost there. 1 or 2 worlds, who cares, right? It's the Imperium. And, we don't lose Guilliman because we can't lose Guilliman. He dies in the books and then comes back straight away because reasons, Emperor. All of the stakes start to get sucked away because 40k isn't a vision anymore, okay? When you see things like Secret Level, why do you think Secret Level is cool? Secret Level is cool because it's 40k. Have you noticed whenever Games Workshop isn't involved in something, whenever Games Workshop gives the reins to somebody else, 40k becomes cool again? Have you noticed that? I have. When a studio who grew up with 40k, I mean Rick Priestley's 40k, when a studio who grew up with that kind of 40k gets a hold of the 40k license, all of a sudden you get something like Secret Level, right? Of course Games Workshop sign off on that because they have to, but they didn't make it. all of a sudden you get something really, really, really cool. As soon as Games Workshop themselves get our beloved 40k, what do we get instead? We get the Plague Wars. We get the Dawn of Fire series. We get Saturday morning cartoon hijinks starring Rabute Gilliman. We get a dumbing down of what 40k actually is, so it becomes less creative and it becomes less sharp along the edges. Why? Because they want to sell 40k to as many people as humanly possible, and they should want to do that. I completely agree with that. But I also think, and I will die on this hill, that Warhammer 40,000 is cool enough in what it is to sell regardless of how edgy it is. 40k is cool and awesome. And you shouldn't need to narrow down and sand down its edges to sell it to the masses. You don't need to do that. Embrace the edginess. Embrace the grimdark. Embrace your heritage of what 40k used to be. And I find it very, very worrying that Games Workshop seem to want to, at every single opportunity they can, whenever they work on something in their own universe, they sand down those edges. They make it a bit more palatable for the wider masses, and they forget that they have an art style, they have a heritage, they have a marker that they should be leaning towards every single time. And the more Games Workshop work on things like novels and artwork, the more we get away from that kind of art style. The more we get away from the grim dark. I think that's kind of terrible. And we lose the right to expression. Because it is much harder. You ask any writer who is, shall we say, a novice, not a novice, what is it? A freelance writer doing it on their own time, you know, an amateur writer who wants to come in and write some 40k scratch lore for the home codex or whatever, right? It is much harder to do that in the current setting of 40k than it is to write in the old setting of 40k. Why? Because limitations are good. I need to explain that a little bit, I think. Let me sip my tea, 1 second. Da-ba-da-da. There we are. Limitations are good. If you go to the beach, right, and you're told, hey, have fun at the beach, play with the sand. You're like, okay. You look around at the beach and you're thinking, well, there's so much here. You're kind of paralyzed by choice. Like, dude, there's no rules here. I can do whatever I want. And in doing whatever I want, I kind of don't want to do anything. I'm always thinking maybe I'm doing the wrong thing, right? Maybe what I'm doing isn't the optimal way of doing it, so you stop and you do something else. And you don't actually end up building anything. You just, because you're so afraid of like losing out and doing it wrong, because you've got all this choice to choose from, and like, you know, what do? You know? There's no guidance there. Now, I say, listen, you look very paralysed there. Why don't you go and play in this sandbox instead? So now you've got a 10-foot, whatever it is, a square sandbox to play in with loads of sand and loads of toys, and you can't play outside of that sandbox. All of a sudden, because the scaffolding is in place, because you have rules, now you can express yourself. Because you're expressing yourself using that scaffolding that is already there in place for you. The problem with modern 40k is there is no fucking scaffolding. It is literally, do what you want, as you will, the law doesn't matter, and whatever we say goes anyway, and we change it every 10 years of what is canon in law, so it doesn't really matter, it's all nebulous. That's nonsense, and it should be called out as nonsense. You need limitations in your setting. 5th edition, 6th edition, 7th edition 40k had limitations. There were certain things you just couldn't do. You couldn't write about Primarchs because they're all dead or disappeared, right? There were hard and fast rules on what was possible in the 40k setting. Space magic worked, yeah, but it had certain limitations. Not everybody could just be a psyker. Not everybody could just be a psychic null. There were certain things that you just couldn't do. And in doing that, working within the limitations, you could create something that was unique and your own by working within those constraints. Nowadays, 40k lore is literally do what you want as you will. The galaxy is a vast place, and to be honest with you, we're making it up as we go along anyway. Why? Because there's female custodians now, and they were never in the game back in the day, but now they are, because we think it'd be cool to put them in. We're Games Workshop, and we don't give a shit about the actual laws and rules that are in our own setting, so why should you? That's where we are right now in 40k, and in doing that, we're stripping away the expression and the ability to express that our players have. And I think that's pretty poor, right? Introduce restrictions. This is why I always say about the female custodies thing, right? I always say it doesn't bother me that much, or at least it wouldn't bother me that much if Games Workshop just introduced a few things where they say, listen, Space Marines are mass-produced, so we can't create female Space Marines. We don't know how to do it, and that's been lost forever. But we can create female custodians because each and every single one of them is a bespoke work of art that takes thousands of years to make. So we have the time and the technology to create female custodians. They're very rare, but they do happen, right? But we can't have female Space Marines because they're mass-produced, and the ability to create new Space Marine genomes is something that is completely lost to us. Done. Brilliant. You now have absolutely clear restrictions on the lore through which other people can write really cool pieces of lore. But Games Workshop didn't do that. They insulted you and said, actually, there's always been female custodians, and then didn't explain anything. Completely open book, completely open field. You now have carte blanche to do exactly whatever the hell you want, and that's a paralysing choice. Despite, that's not even to mention the lack of respect that shows for the heritage that you have in 40k, that you have from the past 30, 40 years even, of 40k's history, right? Getting away from all that, you've now taken away all of the strictures, all of the rules that force respect for the setting. And if you don't respect the setting, why should you take it seriously? Games Workshop, if you don't take your setting seriously, why the fuck should we? And that is why I think Games Workshop and, by and large, Warhammer 40,000 is in danger of becoming a far less creative space. What do you guys think? Are you guys really sated by your creative energies in 40k at the moment? Or do you find it quite restrictive? Do you find it kind of pointless to be creative in 40k right now? Let me know in the comment section down below. I love you a long time. I will speak to you tomorrow for some more Hobby Nightmares. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll speak to you soon. Have a good one. Bye now.